Welcome back. Leslie here, and I'm excited to be here with you for training 3. In this training, we are going to talk about getting down to the source. You can see from me sitting on an exercise ball that there's a lot. We're going to talk about what's above and what's below, and really how all of those things fit together. So as we do, let us sort of just briefly begin with this session with really coming into the body and really aligning our own layers so that everything that you are hearing can get in at all of the different levels, not just at the mind level. So just take a couple of deep breaths. And as you inhale, you might even want to raise your shoulders up. And as you exhale, you can just do a ha sound and let all of the tension just flow right out. And with our mind, we're starting to come inward with our awareness. We're starting to look and direct it on the inside. And just for a few moments, imagine that your eyes can go down through the throat, down through the abdomen, all the way down into the pelvic bowl. Doing a bit of a body scan, noticing the pelvis, noticing the legs, noticing the feet on the floor, noticing the area of the back. Any sneaky holding tension, just notice if there's anything that can be softened in the back, around the shoulder blades. Notice, are the shoulders coming forward? Notice, is there any holding in the belly? Just using your awareness and your breath to come back to your center, coming back to being grounded in the pelvis, noticing that through the central channel, the pelvis connects with the heart. And bringing your eyes, and when I say eyes, I mean your awareness and your focus down into the center of the heart center, which is in the center of the body, a little bit to the right of the physical heart, which sits a little bit off to the left. And as your awareness is there in the center of the chest, just sort of thinking the thought, what I want to receive from this training is, and then just fill in the blank with what's ever there, still staying grounded in the body, not getting pulled up into the mind. Coming back, keeping your awareness of that heart space. And then just making an intention. Could be something like, I choose to receive whatever my body, mind most deeply needs in this moment. Good. And then keeping an eye of awareness in the body itself, gently opening the eyes and coming back. If you like, you can make a little chi warmth with your hands. If you like, rub your head, rub your hands through your hair. If you don't have your hair wrapped up in a scarf, patting down the body, front of the body, sides, arms, back, just really bringing the chi and the focus. Okay, so let's dive in here. I'm going to share my screen and we will get started with really getting down to the source. So last time we were talking about the body, the different parts of the body, and we've been going over this overview of really starting to get down to the technical side. We talked about the mind shifts that we need to make of how is the protector system in the mind body working. And today we're going to really talk about locating the real source of the issue. And because the source is often buried, if the source weren't buried and covered over, you wouldn't be here and we wouldn't be having this conversation because it would have been solved already. So the problem with the issues around where the source actually is it is quite hidden deep in the depths of the body-mind system. So what we're going to talk about in this video that's going to lead towards that is what I would call the trigger cycle. So let's walk through this together. We're going to walk through what actually happens when I feel like I'm losing my shit. What actually happens when I'm feeling like I'm self-sabotaging, or when I am feeling low self-esteem, or when I'm feeling anxiety come up in my body. What's happening when my protector system is getting activated from a perspective of how I experience life and my inner and outer experience. So what happens first generally here is that an event happens. So I'm putting it in the mind category. It doesn't mean, event happening is usually some sort of outer trigger. It could be a physical outer trigger, like you're involved in an event or someone says something, which is sort of in a category outside of yourself. But a trigger can also be a thought that comes up. So a fear happens, or a trigger or an event happens, could be outside of the body or inside of the mind as a thought. But in general, we're working in the category of the mind right now. So that's why it's over here. Now, very quickly, instantaneously, almost when the event trigger happens, in the mind level, there will automatically be things like thoughts and those thoughts and or feelings connected to those thoughts. So that's what happens exactly when the event happens. And often in the body mind, there can also be emotions that arise. Now, quick discussion, what's the difference between emotions and feelings? And there's different definitions out there, but for our purposes, an emotion is a sort of physiologically connected type of thing that arises naturally just by being an organic living organism, mammal type of human. So for example, if someone jumps out and goes rah, I am naturally going to have the emotion of fear. So emotions are things that are a little more wired into our biological nature. They're pretty straightforward in terms of like fear or panic or love or sympathy, empathy. Some of these things are just naturally things that arise. And psychologists in modern times have even done studies that human babies and also gorilla babies are like naturally helpful. I remember in a psychology training, hearing about a study where they put toddlers close to where their mothers were putting clothes on the clothesline. And if the mother dropped a piece of clothing close to where the baby was, the infant, being pre-verbal, not having developed social behavioral senses, would try to, help the mommy with picking something up or picking up a clothespin or things like that. So there are lots of indications that these emotions of wanting to be helpful, of fear or fright, of love and connection, of, laughter and play are things that we see not just in humans, but also in the animal kingdom as well in different ways. So we can see that those things are not arising from the complicated trappings of the human mind. Those things are what we call feelings, which we're going to go for. So in the body-mind mechanism, at the same time that the event happens, often there will also be an emotion. Now, emotions left to their own devices, if we're really clear over here, emotion will come up and pass through and leave. There is, emotions can affect our thoughts and feelings back and forth. So remember, in this background here, you can see these little pink things. There's always this interconnection. So I'm not saying that these are the only times that they're affecting it, but it depends on what's here, how strong the emotion is triggering the feeling. So in the mind, the event happens, there's a thought about it. Then there's those thoughts can also trigger feelings about it, which are similar to emotions, but they've got a little bit more meaning towards them. So let's take an example. I'm at a cafe and I'm waiting in line. And maybe, nowadays it's social distancing. So maybe someone doesn't see that I'm actually waiting in line, or it's kind of ambiguous where I'm standing. And some man comes in and he sort of ends up standing in line in front of me, essentially. Maybe he think I wasn't standing in line. So the event is that I experience him coming into a place that is in line in front of me. Now, my thought right away could be like, what the hell? This guy's jumping in front of me. Didn't he see or he definitely saw me and he's doing this on purpose. So that's a thought that arises in my mind before I can even do anything about it. And that's based on some of my storehouse of impressions. And then I start to have feelings about that. I start to feel indignant. I start to feel angry. I start to get triggered of every other time that I think some man has come in and stepped in front of me or things like that. All of this is happening very quickly. And so what happens in the mind state on a technical level is that as these things sort of cascade down, they start to put on meaning very quickly. This guy's an asshole. He saw me and he didn't, respect me. This is not right. Something needs to be done. These are all mind meanings, which can also create mind stories. People are always doing this. He's a jerk. I can't do anything about it. People are always punishing me. If I speak out, then I'm going to have a confrontation. I don't want to have a confrontation. Any of these things you can see, and you've probably had this or similar, or even more complicated situations. I'm picking a relatively separated conversation example because, if it was your family or things that come up, those things are always more charged and are going to have even more thoughts and more feelings and more meanings. So what generally tends to happen for, especially if this is an area that we haven't really explored in ourselves, we are going to get stuck in all of these things coming, downwards from sort of outer to inner. And we're going to get stuck with these mind meanings and mind stories. And we might even just get stuck there in this sort of what I would call a mind spiral, where we're just really stuck in this situation and we can't get out of it. We're feeling a certain way. So this is what happens in this area. Now, here's the kicker. At the same time that the event happened, what happens is that before we even know it, in the body-mind system, as soon as an event happened, it will trigger whatever we have a deeper Velcro for. So there is a source down in our body-mind system. You could call this our unconscious to a certain extent, but it's more physical than that, where we have this storehouse of our impressions and these deeper unspoken meanings. And in fact, at the same time that the event happens and our mind is working on it, at the same time from the bottom up, something has been triggered if we have the Velcro from it in our inner system that comes upwards from this deeper storehouse of impressions. And it starts to create what I would call a body meaning. Because we already have something within us, it will create a meaning, which is still very unconscious. And then from there, that body meaning that's connected more deeply is going to actually create a physical sensation in the body. Because the body does not think in thoughts. The body speaks and thinks in sensations. Say that again because it's an important part. The body communicates. Remember the previous training we were talking about that the body has two priorities: to keep you safe and to fill in the blank, manifest your unconscious needs. So part of how we know what our unconscious needs to get clear are is we see what's already in, what's there, what's the Velcro, what's sticky within us that is just waiting for an outside trigger to come and to pull it up from the surface. So something happens, it gets triggered, it creates a body has a meaning about it, and this creates a sensation in the body. Now you've all seen this, so let's run that through again. The guy steps in front of me at the cafe, and that triggers something within me that has some sort of Velcro about it. It could be something about wounding around men. It could be having worries about taking my, ability away or my freedom away, or just being generally disrespected and not honored in some sort of way. The reason that we know that this is true is we know that two people can experience the same outer event, but have very different inner experiences. Maybe somebody standing next to me or a different person in that same place, this gentleman does the same thing, and their immediate thought is, oh, he just didn't see me there. Let me just let him know kindly. And they don't even go through any of these thoughts or feelings and things like that. So the important part that we need to notice is that the real difference of really why I'm suffering is because of something deep in my mind-body system that had Velcro for what happens in the outer world. This is a big mind shift I want you to make from this training. I want to challenge you to make the mind shift that the real problem, the real source of the issue that needs looked at is not the outer world, but is the inner world. This is the difference. You may have watched some of my videos on YouTube of the difference between, a challenge and suffering, that we're always going to have challenges in life. There's always going to be things that happen, but the real suffering, the real ways that we are really suffering in life, having difficulty in our life has to do with this inner wiring of ourselves. So let's look at this technically. When the sensations arise, they are also going to interact back and forth with the mind meaning. I start to feel anxious. Anybody who's ever felt anxious can know that when we feel anxious, it starts to affect our mind. And when we feel, we have a certain meaning or a thought or a feeling come up, it's also going to make our sensations worse. So therapy and talk therapy and even somatic therapy is very helpful here. It's going to help us catch our thoughts more so that the feelings are not quite as strong, so that the mind meanings are a little bit better or a little bit less in intensity. And hopefully, ideally, it's going to have a shorter, or maybe we could say like, it helps us. The work that we do in the mind can help us have smaller or shorter mind spirals. So we're not like jacked up about it for the next 4 days. It just maybe goes away in a shorter amount of time. But generally, there's still a little bit of spiraling and a little bit there because usually the traditional therapeutic approach of like cognitive behavioral therapy is generally working in this area. And if you add in some somatic work, it will kind of help you get at least a little bit into, into this area where you're working on helping to reduce some of the sensations or make them a little better. Generally, it's not going as deep here. So that's what we're going to talk about today. Because this is the source of all of these things, although we never actually contact this as a way to actually get rid of it. That's why even if you get through this issue at the cafe with the guy standing in front of you and you work through it and you understand logically that he, maybe you talk to him and say, "Oh, sir, I'm sorry. I was actually waiting in line." He's go, "Oh gosh, I'm so sorry." And then, you're able to work yourself down. But the next time that it happens, you're still likely to have that same reaction because this part here has been untouched. So what we want to see is, where are these things coming from? These things in ourselves, everything that we get triggered about, this is a bold statement. I want you to write it down. Everything that we get triggered in our lives ultimately leads back to the basement. The basement is the word that I use to describe this place that is the source of why we are really suffering with our sensations, and the seed of why we're suffering with the mind. Yes, our mind needs trained up. We need to upgrade our crappy thoughts to better thoughts, but ultimately that is only a management surface part. We also have to not just deal with sensations that arise in the body, but we also have to find out the source of where those are actually coming from and dissolve it in a way so that now when the triggers happen, the actual sensations never arise because we have altered and released what is actually the source. So we call this source in the body the basement. Now, everything that happens, every meaning, every body meaning, and every mind meaning can be traced down to the basement. Here's the tricky thing. Your mind meaning is going to make sense to you. That guy stepped in front of me. That guy is a jerk. It's not nice. It's not right. He shouldn't do that. I should say something. All of these things are logical mind meanings. And you could tell that to someone else and they'd be like, "Yeah, that's true. That's definitely a thing. You're right," kind of thing. And it might be true. However, what I want you to take as another key point from this training is that mind meaning and body meaning are different. This is simple, but very profound. The meaning that your mind puts on something is generally logical, makes sense. You can trace it to the outer world. The meaning that your body connects with things is generally not logical. It generally cannot be understood and approved by the mind in the same way. So this is very big because often when people start going into deeper and deeper levels of really starting to unwind these things very quickly in my certification trainings, when we're working one-on-one, people will say like, "Oh, well, they start to see and hear in new ways their actual body meaning. They'll be like, oh, wow, well, my body's saying this, but that doesn't make any sense. You're right. So you have to know that the mind meaning and the body meaning are generally always going to be different. And the body meaning is not going to be making sense, but the body meaning is much closer to the basement. And that's the one that we have to deal with, even when it doesn't seem logical to our logical mind. So that's an important key point here. So, what we need to talk about is, let's see. So, what we're going to talk about is what actually is in the basement. So, everything that happens in the basement in our outer world can be traced down to the basement. And in the basement, there are only two to three, there's only ultimately three things that live in the basement. I hesitate because it's really two with an occasional like 2.5. There's another one. I'll explain that to you. But most of it, and this sounds crazy, I know, trust me, I've tested it out with a decade of clinical work, that ultimately everything that triggers us, every mind meaning can be traced down to a body meaning, and every body meaning ultimately at its source traces down to one of three things. Those things are some version of a body meaning, body story that says, I am unlovable, which could be I'm unworthy, something's wrong with me, I'm broken, people are going to find out I'm not good, God and the universe made everybody else right except me, I am the one mistake that is unworthy of love, somehow broken, unlovable. All of those things are the same essence of unlovable. So that's one of the things that all body mind stories trace down to. And the other one is, you may have guessed this already, and I've been seeing people in the comments, bring up. And also I read everyone's when we do this as a challenge, I read everyone's applications to come into the challenge. And a lot of people talk about fear of abandonment and really getting triggered. So alone and abandonment is number two. And that can be something like even just loss of love. It doesn't have to be like, I will be banished, but the body really has a belief of like, everyone's going to leave. They won't be around. I'll end up alone. I'll end up alone under a bridge. End up alone under a bridge, living with 5 cats in a box. It doesn't matter. All of those things are alone abandonment. So, two things. The third thing that will occasionally come up, and I don't want you to focus on this too much. It's a little bit rare, but every once in a while it will come up for someone. If you find yourself coming to this one often, it means you're probably still stuck, as I will sometimes say, like on the last step down to the basement and not getting down to the basement itself. So you want to keep looking. But number 3 is sort of sometimes certain people will feel this sense of what I call existential death. So this feeling of like, God, if that, it's just like the worst thing would be just like that my human existence is negated, that like life really has no deep purpose, that my embodiment in this lifetime will just have been nullified. Sometimes that will come up for certain people. So that is a third one in the basement, but generally it's going to be one of these two. I have yet in my many, 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 many years with many, 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 many people yet to see anything in the basement that was not one of these three. So it's possible that you are the one person in the universe that could have something different, but I don't think so. So if you cannot trace it down to one of these things, you are not yet at the source. And the reason why that happens is that the protector system, which we know lives in this area, I had to take out some of the drawings just to create a little bit more space for the presentation. But we know that the body mind is the realm of the protector system. So sometimes when we're starting to do this, the protector system will kind of throw up smoke screens and try to get in the way, and it'll create a little bit of spinning so that it makes it hard to actually get down to the basement. But ultimately, everything can ultimately be traced down to one of these three things: unlovable, I'm going to end up alone, abandonment, or occasionally existential death. These things won't be worth it. So can you see now that when you understand that what it's about is not what it's about. It's never about what it's about. You will sometimes hear me say, this is one of our guideposts in the Body Wisdom Academy. It's never about what it's about. What that means is that what I think I am being upset about on the surface is usually just here in the mind. That what it's ultimately really about is deep within the basement aspect. And that's the part that I need the subtle body tools to get down to systematically trace what it actually is and apply and line up all of the mind, body, spirit, sort of in a very technical way to actually release that. Because if it were really about what was in the mind, then I could just change my mind or my thought, and then I wouldn't have any of the sensations or other things. And anybody who's ever had a panic attack knows that just thinking the thought in my mind, stop having a panic attack, stop having a panic attack, does not stop the sensations of the panic attack. However, I can tell you that I have been with people, and I have, when I was in acupuncture school many years ago, you always had to do various public health clinical rotations. And I was in a group of women and men who were in recovery from substance abuse. And I was working with this woman. We were doing acupuncture, group acupuncture. And she had had something very difficult come up that day, had to talk with her father, who she was estranged from, and she started to have a panic attack. And in that moment, even before I had totally formulated the system, we started to really apply some of these subtle body techniques to really get down to what the basement was and to help her mind body system to loosen those. And within the period of 8 minutes, even without her knowing about it, she was not a woo-woo person. Here was this acupuncture intern in my 20s, like being like, hey, let's do some subtle body work. But she really felt the difference. And so I think it was 2 weeks later, she came back, and my supervisor, they gave us a lot of freedom, so she wasn't exactly sure what I had done. She said, yeah, so-and-so came back and she said you did some sort of like body thing with her and it helped her feel a lot better. So if you could go do that again, that'd be great. So when even in the moment, starting to get equipped with these tools, you can use a subtle body approach to actually change your sensation in the moment, stop the spiral, not just of the mind, like in therapy, but also stop the spiral of the sensation. So the clouds will clear and you have the time and space to trace it down to the basement to see which of these things it actually is, and to actually start to release those so that the next time somebody steps in front of you at the cafe, you can either, first feel totally fine on the inside and either decide, well, it doesn't really matter. That's great. Maybe it's just he needs really to go first. I don't know. Or to politely say, hey, I was actually waiting in line, and to feel totally free and clear on the inside because you have dealt with not just know what's in the basement, but actually use the techniques to get it out. So this is really important. The mind shifts that we're making in this training it's not about what it's about. And what it really traces down to, believe it or not, whether or not, like, there's nothing about a man stepping in front of me in line for a matcha something at a cafe has anything to do logically in a mind thing with me being unlovable or me ending up alone. But yet I promise you that it will in the body meaning realm. And this is the area that makes a difference. So what we're going to go into next is how do we actually interact? We've been going deep really within our own world, but what's actually really important, especially for people who are empaths, healers, and sensitive people, is to actually learn the outer, what I call energetic communication cycle, because this is the one way that we can really sabotage our progress. Because even if you hack the inner world, if you're making a few of these mistakes in the outer world, you're likely sort of re-traumatizing yourself and creating more deeper mind grooves that are going to sabotage your process. So that's what we're going to go deep into tomorrow, as well as then in training 5, talking about the difficulty of generational trauma and just taking on energy that's not yours in the mind body realm. Okay, go deep, receive what you need from these trainings. And I want you to let me know, what is your takeaway from this time? Or even just, did you watch the video? I'm tracking with who is interacting and what you're getting out of this. And you've been asking great questions, so keep that up. That is our training on how to get down to the source to really have the aha of what it's really about. I will see you next time.